Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of IPAs and APIs. Joining us today is Emmanuel Paraskakis from Level 250. Would love to hear a little bit about yourself first, Emmanuel.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Emmanuel and I'm API product manager. I have been one for more than 15 years, either building APIs for various companies or building API tools, API design tools, documentation tools, testing tools, and so on. And these days, I consult around API product management and I also teach API product managers on Maven.
Awesome. Super happy to have you here today. Just to kick things off, what is an API product manager and how is it different than traditional product management?
Yeah, I guess API product management is not that different. I think the difference is in having an actual product manager for APIs. That didn't used to be the case a while ago because we thought of APIs as more technical type of artifacts that were byproducts of our engineering process. And as we found success with APIs, as an industry, we discovered that we need to be more intentional about building our APIs. And sometimes we were able to productize APIs and monetize them and sell them with great success, as we've seen in many examples that are out there.
And what are some misconceptions, different companies are thinking about as they're bringing on API product managers? And is there any specific skills that are required that are different than, typical product management?
Yeah, I would say the API product manager has to be not necessarily more technical than other product managers because the subject matter is more technical. And their users are going to be technical people. They're going to be developers, they're going to be engineers, DevOps, and so on. So API product managers and as do platform product managers have to be able to speak their language and they have to be able to address their needs. So there is some element of technical capability that's there, and that's why a lot of the really good API product managers are former engineers, though not all of them.
And you speak sometimes on this idea of two product managers
Yeah.
at the same time or two customer personas at the same time. What does that mean?
Yeah, this became apparent to me a while ago where, traditional product management looks at the use cases of their direct users. You can go look at your product analytics and figure out what people are doing with your product. Or you can go talk to them, talk to the users, talk to the customers, and find out exactly what they're doing. But with APIs, as with most developer-facing products, we build our products for others to also build experiences with them. So, as an API or platform product manager, I have to be aware of both levels. I have to be aware how my direct users are going to employ my product, what problems they're going to solve, but also what their users are going to solve and what use cases are interesting to them. And I think that opens up a whole world for API product managers where they essentially have to be twice the product manager, if you will, and anticipate a little bit the use cases of their users. Because if they don't, they will only create a limited set of options for of APIs.
That's a really interesting point. And sometimes we see APIs are used both externally, but also used internally as well, even as products. And so, as API product manager, how do you balance the needs and requirements of these
Yeah.
different stakeholders, external, internal, and making sure all of them are met?
Yeah, I would say first off, try to treat internal platform and API products pretty much the same as external ones, because especially in larger organizations, well, your users deserve good experiences internally as well, not just the external users. So if you want adoption, if you want success of your product, even treat internal products the same. Do customer discovery, measure the outcomes, make your products intentionally, do good design, and so on. So, in that sense, there's not that much difference. Of course, with internal audiences, we're liable to know them a little bit better, be able to reach them a little bit more easily. So that's a little bit of a difference there. But the techniques and the goals should not change.
Makes sense. And as someone who's now looking to become a better API product manager, maybe they already have a role and they're aspiring to be in a leadership position. What are some of the common pitfalls that you see for these folks that are
Yeah.
trying to go for those positions?
Yeah, a lot of times we talked about API product managers being former engineers, and a lot of former engineers, when they transition into the product role, they kind of tend to regress back to engineering, if I may put it that way, in the sense that they will try to specify solutions rather than speaking about the why and about the problem and speaking about what their customers want. So that's one really big pitfall. We kind of tend to go back and say, oh, well, here's the architecture that you should use because as a former engineer, I know exactly what I'm talking about. And that really shouldn't be the case. The other case, kind of on the other side of the spectrum, is not being technical enough and not keeping up with the latest technology. And so that's something that you should use. You should get educated about what's happening with APIs, what's happening with techniques around APIs, new processes, new tooling, and so on. So definitely keep that up.
That's a really interesting point, and that as engineers or former engineers, we can have tunnel vision and forget about the different use
Yeah.
cases or even technologies out there. What are some resources that you go to keep up to date on the API ecosystem and latest developments in product management?
Yeah, I try to first of all follow. I have about a dozen people that I follow and read religiously. They have amazing newsletters, and most of them are people that you know and have brought onto your podcast, so they won't be new to your listeners. You had Mike Amundsen last time. Mike's a great resource. So there are folks that I read almost religiously, I should say. Also, pretty much the same cohort of folks have written books around APIs, and those are a great resource. And definitely keep going to events, sometimes conferences, sometimes even your local meetups. And I have to say that here in San Francisco, we're very lucky to have amazing events that happen pretty much daily. And if you're in a major city, try to go to those technical events. That's probably the number one source of new know-how for me.
Definitely, and glad to have Mike on. We just talked about customer observability, so I think
Yeah.
it's very timely as we're talking about API product management. But what are some metrics and ways to track these metrics for a product manager?
Yeah, I mean, look, all the usual technical metrics apply because the technical metrics uh, translate into experience for users. So if you're thinking about uptime or if you're thinking about latency, keep measuring those and keep tracking those because that will translate, improving those metrics will translate to a better experience for your users. But I think there's also a couple of other categories of metrics. And one very important one is how you instrument your, let's call it a funnel, a marketing funnel, but for developers, for developer experience. When people reach our developer portals, they usually don't know what to expect. They are trying to find out what capabilities we have with our products, if those products are suitable for them, and if they can use them easily. So don't expect everybody that comes to your developer portal to immediately adopt your APIs. There's going to be people that are not interested or that don't understand your product. And then there's going to be a percentage of people that sign up to explore your product. And out of those people, there's going to be the people that are successful with your product. They make, that one first API call that we talk about. And then they might make, more API calls because they are now imagining what they can do with your product. They are now exploring use cases and they might, find success. And you could measure that by tracking the number of API calls they do. And out of those people, some will actually sign up as a paid or as a higher tier user. So all of those stages are stages that you should instrument and track and understand. And of course, to find success with your product, you have to improve those metrics, all those conversions from one gate to another. And that's really, really important. And I do believe that sometimes, just because it's a developer product or a technical product, we don't do a good job of tracking those metrics.
Well, definitely getting to that first API call and helping a developer, to really get to production or at least build something of interest is, of course, that's what we're all after. Outside of just getting to that first API call, what are some more, both quantitative and also qualitative metrics, that you think of when we talk about like developer experience and adoption?
Yeah, and especially for product managers, there are things that will be interesting, like the adoption of a particular feature. Let's say you release a new API and you want to see if people use it. You should be instrumenting and tracking that. And kind of the reverse of that is, hey, we just put out a new version of a API because we decided we want to do away with all the old stuff. That happens over time. When is it safe to take away the older APIs? Is anybody still using them? Is anybody transitioning to the new version? So those are things we need to keep track of as product managers. And then, of course, you have all of the let's call them sales or marketing metrics that have to do with either adoption or maybe I want to find out, who are my top users are. Who, who are the top users that are exceeding, let's say, their rate limits, which means that we might be able to offer them a better plan.
And so I guess as you're digging into this data, how do you balance, between advocating for the developer needs and customer needs versus sales, right? Because we also don't want to force someone to, upgrade too quickly or into a
Yeah,
sales cycle. Is there anything
yeah.
that an API product manager can do to balance different stakeholder needs?
Yeah, and it depends on whether your organization is taking a PLG approach or if you're a small organization or a larger organization. We can dig into those. But typically, what happens is you may want to instrument for marketing and sales data more in your, let's say, sandbox environment, the environment that people or developers play in before purchasing or before becoming paid users. So those are things that are very tactical, and your sales and marketing should be looking at who who signed up but is not making API calls, or who signed up and is making a lot of API calls. They must be very interested. Let's go talk to them. And especially if you're doing product-led growth, those are things that you should be monitoring throughout that cycle. Now, in your production environment, for your customers, that's data that's more for either, let's say, product managers, where they want to know how the product is being used. Are people being successful? Are they finding difficulty with the product? Or perhaps if you're a larger organization, you might have customer success and they care about the renewal or the adoption of a particular customer. And there you should offer them more of the metrics in the production environment. Not that sales are not that interested in what people are doing in production, but typically, especially in larger organizations, that moves off towards the customer success function.
That's an interesting point in that, nowadays people are looking at APIs way before and doing their investigation before they even talk to sales, right? And so there's a lot of steps that now need to be tracked. But at the same time, we also hear this idea of outcomes and making sure that we're aligned to outcomes from a business standpoint. Am I just trying to, get the highest request per second, or is there something else that I should be measuring when I think about success of a API or success
Yeah,
of a
I'm glad
customer?
you bring up outcomes because that kind of ties very closely with the value of our product. And the value of our product is not just the technical aspect of it. Oh, I was able to make an API call. Oh, I was able to, move this much data from one place to another. That's not particularly interesting per se. But the value is what we get out of it. And if you think about products that are truly API as a product, let's say, for example, I mean, the classical example is Stripe. The outcome there and the value is very clear. If you're successful, you're selling more, then Stripe is also successful because they're taking a cut of the revenue. So the outcome there is very, very clear. And I think that's part of the reason why Stripe has been very successful with APIs. They've been able to clarify that and they've been able to find that use case where the outcome is so aligned with that of their users that the value is super clear to everybody. And I think those two are related.
And so if I'm just getting started, trying to start tracking some of these outcomes and metrics, what should I, as a senior API PM, I said that wrong, do to help, convince, my leadership team and stakeholders?
Well, I mean, the first thing is to think about exactly what you're going to measure, because even with the best measuring tools, you're not going to get everything out of the box. You have to actually instrument it where you're going to be measuring, and also what outcomes you're going to be measuring. If the outcome is going to be that a sale was made, it has to be clear somewhere in the code that there is something that tags that, and then that's measured in your analytics. So be clear about that. The second thing would be to be able for being able to persuade or convince people to adopt your tools and your APIs internally, and to basically invest in your projects as an API product manager, would be to make sure that the proposals that you have, the products that you are going to launch, align with company strategy. And very often that's not the case, because we kind of have this myopia where we say, well, of course, it should be obvious that by doing, API governance, or by having better API design, or by exposing everything that we have as APIs out there for people to do who knows what. Of course, that should be a good idea. Good things will come from that. But it does cost money to do that, and businesses are constrained about the resources that they have. And I found that if you don't align with not just any priority or any business metric that exists, but really the top three priorities of an organization, not much is going to happen. Pretty much anything that's not top three is just going to fall by the wayside, because we all have a lot to deal with. And usually those initiatives have to do with just a handful of things. It could be, of course, more revenue. It could be more efficiency. It could be compliance with legislation, compliance with new things that are happening, or it could be even be a better customer experience. So traditionally, businesses think about these four things. And if you're not aligning with these four things, and if you're not aligning with the business strategy, you're not going to get that much done. So you have to find a way to align and improve on those.
That's a really interesting point, to take your own metrics and make sure, does it roll up into one of those, I guess,
Yeah.
4 points, or what matters at the business overall. As we're looking at these APIs and, new folks are trying to productize and expose these APIs, does that mean I should be generating revenue, or what are the different business models that come around these new API programs?
That's really interesting, because you have to be able, even in the case where we don't directly monetize APIs, like the case of Stripe, or let's say if I'm Google Maps and I'm selling these billions of API calls at a particular price point, there it's very easy to attribute that revenue to, here. That many API calls means this much revenue. But in most cases, in a lot of cases, and what could be more of an example than Salesforce, you are creating a better or a more sticky or a more persistent experience for users. You are delivering value that comes from automating things and integrating things that you couldn't do otherwise. And that has a lot of value. You have to be able to express this value. And I do believe that Salesforce, for example, publishes a number. I'm not too sure exactly what it was, but it's in the billions of value that they attribute just to their APIs. So don't think about only directly monetizing APIs. It doesn't make sense in all cases. If you have data that nobody else has, if you're able to do something really, really well, let's say you're Twilio and you're able to do phone calls and text messages really, really well, great. Then you can, monetize that directly. But if what you're doing is going to give your customer that much more capability, if they can automate and integrate, then keep on doing that because that's going to deliver value to them.
That definitely makes sense on attributing value, regardless if it's dollars and cents or not. If I'm trying to figure out, does it make sense to charge, for this API or some type of model there? What is the process that a product manager should go through as they're, trying to figure out that right strategy?
Yeah, I think it would be trying to categorize a little bit where your API falls. We talked about if I have data or resources that nobody else has, then I am able to put those behind monetization and say, here you go. Pay me for the outcome that happens. If I'm able to do things more easily or more efficiently, if I'm SendGrid, for example, and I can send an email really, really well and deliver it, actually, versus you doing it by yourself and actually not having the email delivered, I can charge for that increase in value. So I would say try to categorize what the benefit is that you bring to the table. And if your data is generic, well, then you're not bringing that much benefit. And sometimes it turns out we don't charge for that data. Like, for example, there's an API for the US government to distribute weather. Well, they don't. Obviously, they have some data that nobody else has, but I don't think they're going to charge for that because it's not only a public good, but it gives the ability for others to build on top of that. So that's another way where it might be a good idea to charge for the data, but you might explicitly decide not to do that. But I would say categorize what the value is that you bring and see if you're able to express it in a way that you can monetize.
That's a really interesting point around categorizing the value and also figuring out, is it more of an ecosystem play? Is it
Mm,
direct for revenue play? And there's a lot of different businesses that can be created through APIs, even if it's not revenue.
yeah.
Just on the last topic here, everyone keeps talking about Gen AI and how it's impacting everyone. So not surprised, I'm going to bring it up as well. But how is Gen AI impacting API product management, either from tooling or leveraging Gen AI?
I think there's two different angles to this. And one angle is um, as product managers, we have to think about uh, the consumption of our APIs by entities or agents that are not going to actually read our documentation and that we can talk to and they can ask us questions if they get confused. I think our ability to make APIs usable for agents is going to help us, especially if we're doing an API as a product. If I'm a data provider, if I'm Google Maps, I want to make sure that all my APIs are suitable to be consumed by agents. Because if they're not, an agent is going to go elsewhere and get the data where it's easiest, or it's going to go scrape some website, or it's just not going to find the data. So I think we're going to have a proliferation of agents. It appears that way. And those agents are going to need API data, and it's on us to make that data easier to consume for agents. So there's a whole conversation happening there. How do we do that? What does it mean to prepare for agent consumption? That's one thing. So the agent as a new persona, if you will, that's both a buyer and a consumer of our of
Mhm.
our of our data and our services. And then, of course, like any other job or any other category, um, product managers in general are either afraid of or benefiting from AI, depending on who you ask, and API product managers more so. Why API product managers more so? Well, it turns out API product managers, like everyone in APIs, deals a lot with structured data. And one of these structured data artifacts is an API description, such as OpenAPI. Well, it also turns out that LLMs and AI is very helpful at producing these structured artifacts, such as OpenAPI. And where it was very difficult for us to sit there and write an extensive, very descriptive document that does everything accurately, it's much more easier today to produce it automatically or to produce it through an LLM. I shouldn't say automatically. And then, of course, we can reuse it everywhere, and we can even reuse it to code using AI from the OpenAPI or from the API description. We can use it to scaffold API management. We can even use it to create and write our stories and our PRDs and create diagrams for people that are going to implement our API. So there's a lot we can do. And the benefit is that it takes away the toil and the drudgery of what used to be really boring, templated kind of work. So I think we're seeing a lot of improvement there.
That's a really interesting point about thinking you're almost like SEO optimization, but for APIs. You got to optimize them
Yeah,
for the agents as a
some call it
component
agent
itself, right?
experience, a new term, AX.
We had developer experience, and now soon we'll have agent
Yeah,
experience, I guess, right?
yeah.
So, what should then a API product manager be doing today to be prepared for, I guess, this Gen AI world that we're coming into?
Yeah, I mean, if you take it from from the agent consumption perspective, I think first of all, a lot of the good recommendations and techniques that people advocate for are still apply. So you should have a machine readable version of your API, like an API description document, like OpenAPI, that an agent can come and read. You should be able to onboard somebody, an agent or a human, extremely quickly, like instantly. So no waiting for the credentials, no waiting to be approved. I should be able to request credentials and receive them immediately so I can consume my information immediately. Same for making that first API call or the nth API call. I should be able to deal very well with spikes. So agent traffic, I think, is going to be very, very spiky. It's not going to be predictable. You might have a lot of data that you have to distribute in a very short amount of time, and then no data at all as the agents move on to something else. Um, in fact, there's dedicated tools like I think AI gateways that are kind of more API gateways, but for being able to deal with this spiky type of traffic. And then I would say be consistent, follow standards, make it easy for the LLM or the any kind of tool to understand your API. And that's good advice, you know, even for human developers. And you should be doing that anyway.
Definitely. It sounds like we already have to be tracking developer experience metrics and how long it gets to generate that key and making an API call, but now it's gonna be on, much more accelerated. So getting that type of metrics and tracking it and improving it is gonna be even much more important. Um, well, thanks a lot, Emmanuel. I really
Yeah,
appreciate having you here on the podcast. Any takeaways or items that you want to share with our audience today?
yeah, I think definitely if you don't have product managers in your API organization, definitely look at that. It's going to enable you to do a much better job at APIs, and a product manager is going to be able to bring that customer point of view inside the organization. Now, if you don't have a product manager, chances are somebody's already doing that. And they might not just have the title. Maybe a lead developer is doing that. So I would say formalize that and make sure that you do have an API product manager that's trained to do that, and maybe offload some of those customer conversations to a person whose role is dedicated to that. The problem with not having that role is that you might have some myopia and only kind of build products looking internally, and there there's a risk that your products might not find success in the market, even though you did all the work and spent all the resources. So I would say look at API product management as a thing, even for internal APIs, not just external APIs.
That's an important piece. Make sure if you're going to treat it as a product, make sure you truly treat it as a
Yeah,
product and not halfway there. Otherwise, you just cause a lot of commotion between the different engineering
100%.
teams.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much and have a good day.
Yeah.